I had health issues most of my life as a kid, like most patients, but it wasn't super obvious. And then, in high school, I was playing sports and I was getting hurt more than the other athletes. I was the kid who always had ankle braces on playing sports and running and things like that. I just thought I was kind of a clumsy athlete, which I was also because of proprioception issues, but, I didn't think that something else was wrong until I started college, and I was playing college lacrosse my freshman year, and everything sort of fell apart. I mean, it was like traumatic injury after another, resulting in surgeries, and I didn't even have a reason for why it was happening, so I ended up quitting lacrosse without a reason for, my teammates or anyone for really, why I couldn't do it anymore. And I was really fortunate. I was always interested in a career in research and medicine, and so I had this internship at a clinical research place they were doing. It was all actually psychiatry research. But one of the doctors that I was interning with said, why do you keep showing up in crutches and a sling? And I was like, I don't know. I tore my labrum in both of my hips walking up the steps. And he was like, walking up the steps? And he kind of just goes, oh, can you show me your hands? Can you touch your thumb to your forearm? And, went through some little EDS, hypermobility things with me and said, I think you should see a rheumatologist. You might have a connective tissue disease. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I was like, is that something you catch? I didn't even know it was an inherited condition. And so I went to see this rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist's wife had EDS. And so I was diagnosed within a few minutes of being there. So from the time I heard connective tissue disease to my diagnosis was 2 weeks, which is so uncommon. And I'm really grateful that I was able to get answers so quickly, even though I did struggle with symptoms for so long. Getting those answers really quickly, I think, has helped me be a really good advocate for myself and get better medical care because I knew what the answer was. That doesn't mean it was still easy by any means, but so I was diagnosed as a sophomore in college. It was around 1920 when I got my diagnosis, and things definitely got a little better in the sense that I could tell physicians, hey, I have this, but around that point in my life, my health also continued to get worse even though I had that diagnosis. And I think a lot of that was mostly due to being so active my whole life, not knowing, pushing my body so much. So it resulted in a lot of orthopedic surgeries, spinal fusions, things like that, that maybe could have been avoided if I was diagnosed sooner. Not necessarily. I was kind of on that pre-med track. I thought I wanted to go to med school, a lot of people who major in biology do. And I did some research actually hoping to help my resume for going to medical school. And while I was doing research, I was like, wait, I like this, and I don't even want to take the MCAT anymore, and I think I want to go to grad school. But I wasn't planning on going right away. I actually followed my boyfriend, who's my fiance now, to Charleston and applied to MUSC on a whim. Only school I applied to. I thought, well, if I'm moving to Charleston, maybe I can try to get a PhD. Got waitlisted and then got in, and then all of this sort of just happened. So it wasn't necessarily the immediate plan, but I knew that I liked research, and now I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
I was in my final year as a graduate coordinator, and at that point, all these new students come in and have orientation, and it was sort of my last time to introduce myself to this new crop of students. And so during orientation, I got up and I introduced myself, and being at MUSC my entire career, I sort of know the different areas of specialties and expertise at MUSC, and sort of offered my advice if any student wanted to come by and talk to me about how to navigate research labs or clinical labs, and just offer my advice. And so some people take me up on it, some people don't. She was one that actually took me up on it. She came into my office. I don't know if you scheduled a time or not. You probably just walked in knowing you. And she just came in, sat down, and asked. We started talking. I said, "What do you want to do? What's your direction
I had
you want
no
to pursue.
idea.
She is clueless. She was like, I don't know.
I was like, I didn't even know I was going to get a PhD. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, she's like, I got lucky to get in. I don't know what I'm doing here. So, she asked me, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I work on, my main focus was heart valve disease and genetics of heart valve disease and sort of the causes of valve disease in people. And she said, oh, well, I have that as a part of my family. I have mitral valve prolapse as part of this connective tissue disease known as Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. And I said, oh, I had heard of that. Most people working in the heart valve world have heard of Ehlers-Danlos, but so I said, what's your disease gene?
Yeah, so the first time we met, he's like, what mutation do you have? What's wrong with you?
Yeah. And she's like, nobody knows. I'm like, nah, come on, that's not true. Like, people know what she's like, no, there's 13 or 14 subtypes of EDS. I have the most common type known as hypermobile or type 3. And I was like, wow, I didn't know there was that many different types. And all the, genes for all the other ones, everything, all the other subtypes except for hEDS were known. And so I just maybe stupidly posed the question of, well, do you want to try to figure out a gene for hEDS? And she said, you can do that? I said, I don't know. I can't, but maybe you can. And so that started she did a rotation in the lab. You have to do 3 rotations as part of MUSC's graduate program. And so she did, it was your first rotation you did? First rotation with me. And then, decided to come back and work on that project. But
it would have been hard to turn down that opportunity.
Yeah, it was a unique opportunity. I think it's important to allow kids, young adults, whatever you consider yourself, the opportunity to be creative and pursue something they're passionate about. I mean, so what better opportunity for a student to pursue a disease that affects them? And so from that, I said, well, okay, I need to figure out, like, how rare is the disease? Why hasn't anybody else found a disease gene? Let's not do what everybody else has done and failed at. Let's do something that will hopefully be revealing. And so while she was actually initiating this project, a completely new project for the lab, she was working on, at the same time, she was working on a separate disease that was, kind of related to her overall goal of trying to understand connective tissues. And because I was always under the guise of, okay, when we can't find a gene, she'll have something to, continue working on. Like, her whole PhD won't just fall apart. So there were 2 programs embedded in what she was doing. And, then
the side project, or the main project, quickly became the side project, and the hEDS project really took over. One of the things that was really important initially was to really make sure that Chip understood, what patients deal with, and more than what you can find from just reading a few papers that have been published on hEDS. So I've always been involved in the local and online patient community. And what was really cool is Charleston, where MUSC is, we have a lot of patients that are local, and so
you're gonna try to make me cry. I know where you're going with this. You're gonna try to make me cry, aren't you? I cry at all of these interviews, by the way. So,
I'm not trying to be. If you cry, that's on you. So I had him come to the Bobby Jones Chiari Sarangema Foundation had a lecture at MUSC. They had Dr. Sunil Patel gave a talk, and they had patient testimonials, and there were a bunch of patients there. And I thought this was a great opportunity because, it was a physician giving the talk, but there were still patients there, and I thought this would be a cool thing for him to kind of see the local patient community in Charleston. And there were 2 kids who gave testimonials and talked about their experience with neurological and neurosurgical issues with hEDS. And I think that was kind of a really key moment for our research and for him to, you know, really see that these are the other patients out there. This is what they're going through. Look how many live right here in Charleston. And I think that really kind of sparked, okay, we need to have a registry, and we need to, you know, maybe get some of these local patients. And initially that's what we thought we were going to do, you know, get some of these local patients involved, consent them, get their DNA, do some genetics. But the second it kind of hit like the online community, it grew very quickly. Not something we were expecting or really ready for, but something we're so glad has happened.
Yeah, that was an eye-opening experience.
It was kind of overwhelming at first. It was for
kind
him.
of.
It was for him more than
Completely
me,
overwhelming.
because he was getting all the emails.
I thought I was going to get 50 people. I mean, but it told me that this community was like desperate and needed, you know, you look at it and you're like, gosh, okay, you know, we believe it's 1 in 500 or more common than that, and nobody's working on it. And so you know, I didn't quite grasp the magnitude. I didn't grasp at all the magnitude of what working on the disease, like what type of magnitude that would be. And it doesn't, I mean, a gene is very important to find, right? It's very important to find the genetics, but there's so much more than that, and nobody was doing anything. And so, you know, when we got 1,000 patients to, you know, finish the pre-screen process overnight and be global. I mean, we could only take, MUSC would only allow us to take those from the U.S., but, you know, we had global interest, like, overnight. I'm like, wow. And that's when we knew it was important to do this. That's when I was, you know, the thing with the CSF Foundation, that was a moment in my career.
Oh. So it's
I'll be
more
okay.
It's more than just a research project, I think, right? Like it's for both of you, I assume.
Yeah, it's become you know, something that's part of what we are now, and just providing an option, providing hope that we're just one lab. We can't do all of this, right? And we have some really cool initiatives that we're working on that will make sure that is not the case. We need a lab like this in every state. You know, we need institutes in every state to help these patients. But yeah, it was the IRB to get the registry up, and the CSF were the NIDAs, that the catalyst that made everything else happen. So yeah, it made our lives very busy.
Yeah, so the lab has grown, you know, with the registry sort of exploding. We've had to hire clinical coordinators. We've had to have a whole team of coordinators working on this to kind of get through all of the consents that we never imagined having. We started an intern program, so we have our hEDS intern program, and we have 5 students this summer. We had 4 last summer, and they all have EDS. They all are interested in a career in research or medicine. And they come to the lab and they get to work on their own project that's of interest to them when it comes to EDS. And the goal is really to have them go on and be experts in their field on EDS and teach others, whether they're in medical school or a PhD or whatever they go on to do, kind of educate down the line and start to change the perception of the disease and how seriously it's taken and awareness and everything like that. And then with that intern program, we've also just had a lot of interest from other people with EDS who have a science background or want to go into research and want an opportunity to intern, shadow, work in the lab. So we've had a couple high school students with EDS locally who have come in and gotten to do some science, which is awesome to just get to be in a research lab as a high schooler, but then to get to work on your own disease is really cool. We have a lab technician with EDS who's working full-time in the lab, and we're hiring actually a second one. And it's not just, I think, because of the interest in EDS, but I think it's also that they know that our lab environment is going to be inclusive and accommodating to people with disabilities, because half the lab does have EDS and has a chronic illness and is disabled. So, they see it as this is a safe space where I know that I'm not going to have a lot of issues with my employer or my coworker working in that environment. So it's kind of become a place for students with disabilities in general to want to be in.
When before we had the intern program, this is the second year that we're finishing up having it. It's got one more week this summer. I was given a small amount of money, my first donation to the lab, the first time I'd ever been given a gift, a financial contribution to our research. That was outside of NIH or other foundations. It was a personal gift. Because this donor contacted me and said, "What do you need to make an impact?" And I said, "I need hands. I need people to work in the lab." I mean, at that point, I don't remember how big the lab was, but it wasn't that big. And it was you and maybe one other person working on EDS. And so he said, "Well, okay, I'll give you this small amount. I'll give you this donation." And then we thought, well, it's not enough to hire a team, right? It was a $50,000 gift. For me, that was like a massive amount of money, because I was like, this person's actually giving me like $50,000. That's a lot of money. And I'm like, but I can't even hire I can hire maybe one technician for that. And so we thought, well, why don't, we're seeing a lot of these young college students enroll in the registry and contact us about, can they be involved? And so that was when we said, well, let's use this $50,000 to support an intern program where the criteria are, need to have EDS or have somebody in the family with EDS. And you need to have a passion to pursue this as your career. Either research, healthcare, some aspect of it that's going to be working on EDS, because how do you change the perception of this disease? You're not going to change, you're probably not going to change it in a 60 or 70-year-old rheumatologist who believes this is hEDS is a characteristic like hair color, right? So you need to start trying to build a community of scientists and healthcare providers that get it. And so this was our initial attempt at that. Say, okay, let's bring in these people. They want to work in the lab. They want to work on their own disease. Let's build patient scientists. And I think that was really, for us, was an amazing moment where we're like, yeah, like, why wouldn't we do that? Why don't other people do that? For other diseases, this should be something that's, all these colleges and academic institutions have these undergraduate research programs. Some of them are for, underrepresented minorities, which disabilities factors into, but really having this as a driving force where people come in, students come in with a disease and they want to learn more about it. There should be that option. And so we felt that this was our little way of hopefully making an impact, a long-term, long-standing impact, 10, 15 years down the road. You're going to build a larger community of people who understand the disease. And so besides just the granularity of the science that happens at the bench, we needed to have a bigger vision, because we were sort of unknowingly thrust into this situation where we have an opportunity to make an impact. And research is one way to move the needle for the disease, but then education is so critical.
Yeah.
And this was one way where we could do research and education at the same time.
When I was first diagnosed with EDS, I was like, okay, I have a chronic illness. And for so long in my mind, like chronic illness and disability were separate things. Until I started learning that having a chronic illness is a disability. And you think of accommodations a lot of times as things that like, having a ramp if you use a wheelchair, things that you can really like see. And so as I got more sort of involved in this disability space, I started realizing how invisible type illnesses, things like EDS, are really difficult for people to get accommodations for. And then being in the science space, I thought a lot about, okay, what can be done to make this more accessible for people to be in science and have disabilities. And so, the more I talked to other students online, but also in person, I realized how many graduate students have things that do count as a disability, right? I mean, it might be things like mental health, anxiety, and depression, but all of those things impact your ability to do research and how you work in the lab. So I started looking at little things that were helping me and sort of sharing that with others. And I even, at one point made a Google Doc of, accessible things for lab. And so one of those was these like ergonomic pipettes that we have at almost every bench in our lab now. Even people who don't have EDS are like, wow, these are so much easier
they're
on your
amazing.
hand. Like little things like that we were like, wow, these things make such a difference. And I started realizing how much kind of getting accommodations, the burden's really placed on the person who needs them. And rather than being outwardly accommodating in general, we, force people with disabilities to maybe sometimes have uncomfortable conversations that are difficult to navigate, or they might not even know what to ask for. So I joined this really cool group on campus called the Alliance for Disability Advocacy, which actually already existed before I got to MUSC. And it was started by a student who had EDS, who was a medical student, which is like so cool. I was like, no way, like this is awesome. And I started working on some presentations for groups of students, students in medical school, dental school, all over, about ways that we can just kind of incorporate accessible practices into daily life. So turning on closed captions when you're giving a PowerPoint presentation. You click a button and it does it for you, and then the person who might need them doesn't have to ask for it. So I started getting really involved in that space and, what can we do when we're looking at fluorescent microscope images? The default colors are red, blue, and green, and that's not really great. So we were like, okay, what can we do in case people might have issues seeing these colors, and how can we change our images? And there were some guides out there online already, but no one was really doing it. So I started talking a lot about how we can just make our science accessible from the start. And there might be other accommodations people need, but there are really simple things that can become sort of general practice. So I started talking a lot about that online, and I didn't actually realize how much attention it was going to get until I was starting to be invited as a speaker for things that I was like, I don't think I'm an expert on this. I don't think I'm qualified to speak on this. And they're like, no one else is talking about this. I was like, okay, I guess I'll do it. So I gave a talk for the College of Engineering at Penn State University. It was for they were doing a diversity, equity, and inclusion training day, and they were like, disability is always left out of this. We need someone to present on disability. And I immediately thought, I don't think I'm the person for this. Like, maybe I can help you find someone else. And they were like, no, we really want you to talk about it as you sort of perspective as a student with a disability. And so I kind of, similar to the registry, I kind of didn't expect it to turn into this, but I really enjoy it, and I really like connecting with other people. I get a lot of messages from incoming graduate students or medical students who just want advice on what accommodations they can ask for, how to navigate the process, and what I always get frustrated with is that, you know, a lot of times universities, corporations, businesses, they really do the bare minimum to, you know, be legally ADA compliant, but they really don't go above and beyond for people. And so sometimes it takes finding the right environment and finding the right research mentor who's going to be accommodating that, or the right school who's going to appreciate students with disabilities and what they bring to the table. There's definitely a lot of different things. I would say one of them just being a woman in science in general, and I actually wrote a little story for MUSC's blog about this, is that you're generally not always as respected as men in the field. You know, I was just telling him, you know, we've gotten a lot of emails where it's like Dr. Norris and Courtney. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I have a doctor too. So it's just those little things where it's like, I don't care if you call us Chip and Courtney, but if you're going to address him as doctor, you can also use it for me. So there's a lot of little things like that you know, experience as a woman. And then, you know, when you add on another compounding factor like a disability, it can be more challenging. And I don't think that I've faced a lot of issues in my PhD with having a disability, mostly because I've been in an environment where I have a mentor who's accommodating. I've been out a lot for surgeries and things like that, but I've never had to take a leave of absence, which is what a lot of universities would make you do, and lose my stipend or anything like that because I've been in an accommodating environment. But I notice a lot of things, you know, at conferences where you might walk in and there's no option except stairs, right? And so there are just things like that I've noticed, okay, today I'm fine with doing the stairs, but if my knee wasn't good today or my hip was having issues, I might not have been able to use the stairs, and I don't know how I would have approached that. So it's definitely something that's always in the back of my mind, and I now kind of see disability through a lens of not just how does this impact me, but how would this impact people with other disabilities. So we've done things to improve the lab for other people with disabilities too. We added an accessible door, so we have a thing that you wave to open the door now. We're the only lab in our building that has that because that wasn't built into the design when they made it.
I think one of only 2 labs in the entire campus that have an accessible door, a truly accessible door.
Yeah.
That's kind of sad, though.
And this took a while, like to make it happen took a while, and it wasn't that we necessarily had, okay, this person needs it, but we said if we're going to have an intern program, we have no idea who might need this. I mean, even for someone who might not use any mobility aids, if you're carrying something back to the lab and you maybe can't open the door with your other arm for whatever reason, it just improves things. So we've been working on doing things like that to make sure that no matter what kind of student or, you know, intern or whoever walks in the door, no matter what their disability might be, that we can kind of be prepared for that ahead of time.
Are you also trying to like be a role model for the other labs? You know, if you say there are only 2 that have an accessible door, like do you try to push this for like, the whole university? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's part of the stuff that we're talking about with the group on campus. So we're doing actually like an accessibility audit, we're calling it. So we're going through all the buildings on campus and basically putting together a list of things that need to be improved, at least when it comes to physical accessibility, and presenting it to the university, saying, hey, you shouldn't wait for a student to be accepted and enrolled that has a disability to make these changes, because the day they start, this needs to be ready for them. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the issues we find in general with the ADA and policies, is that there's no required timeline. There's no clear description of who's responsible to pay for things. So at big universities, there's this debate of, okay, well, does the department pay for it? Does that college pay for it? Does the university as a whole pay for it? And so even though there are policies in place for accessibility, they're not great, and they don't require it to happen quickly at all, which can be a big issue. So yeah, definitely. I think from my experiences and talking to so many other people with disabilities in science, I hope that we can just improve the campus in general, not just our lab, but all over. We have a lot of projects we're planning. We're
begun.
Yeah.
More than just planning.
Yeah. We've formed a lot of really awesome clinical collaborations. So, you know, what physicians can we work with to develop projects on different areas? So, you know, we're already working on mast cell activation syndrome. Mm-hmm. We're working on dermatological issues and wound healing. We're working with Dr. Patel on tethered cord is a big project interest for us. So
psych,
yeah,
sleep problems, all these we have either IRB approvals already in place and a clinical champion that is devoting effort to it, or the IRBs are pending. So, I mean, we've already in GI. I mean, there's so many different areas that we're trying to tackle.
And it's, you know, when you look at what we've done so far, I see that as a really great starting place. And then from genetics, we can build projects in all of these different areas. So I think it's going to continue to grow with how many projects we have and how many people we're collaborating with. And so,
I mean, population genetics, we're getting ready to genotype 1,000 DNAs. That's done in collaboration with some of our colleagues in Europe. Having, you know, clinical demographics, understanding more what are really the breakdown of the comorbidities, you know, the what's in the Beighton score and the, you know, diagnostic criteria isn't great, and so, you know, why are certain things included and not others, and especially when there's a higher prevalence of certain things, they should be included. So, you know, we're looking at the clinical demographics, like, and that's something that we get from our huge patient registry. So, yeah, and then, you know, exploring the clinical care center, you know, really making an impact for the patients so they don't come for neurosurgery and then leave and go someplace else for, you know, have to fly across the country to get GI specialists or mast cell or pain or, you know, I mean, they, you know, what happens to the people who can't afford to do that? Even the people who can't afford to do it, it's incredibly painful for most of these people to travel. So there needs to be, you know, an all-inclusive institute, center of excellence, whatever you want to call it, that brings together the research arm and the clinical care with experts in the field that understand the disease. So our vision is, yes, we started with the genetics, identify, you know, a gene or two, and then you know, go beyond that.
you know, I have friends who are patients, and then, you know, I have two friends, you know, one of them's in school for genetic counseling, and I actually have two other ones who are doing PhDs, so they would, like, understand the science, too. So it's so hard, because I know if I, like, told them about it, they'd actually have, like, tons of scientific feedback, and I'm just, you know, sitting here, like, I really want to. Yeah, I mean, I get messages all the time. One of our interns, you know, posted a, like, reel or a TikTok or something in the lab this summer, and she got a message, and they were like, you know, can you tell me what the gene is? Like, I won't tell them that you told me.
Yeah, I won't say anything, I promise.
Yeah,
but it's important to know that like what we found does not account for everybody. I mean, this is not going to be, you know, if there was one gene that caused EDS, it would have been found. It would have already been found. And so, you know, there are going to be multiple genes, and we want more people in genetics studying this. I mean, you know, but it's important also to not only get geneticists, but people who understand biology and can develop, you know, biological assays and really test pathogenicity. All this stuff with VUSs, you know, it's a thing that we get commonly. Is like we tell people, do not send your genetics, you know, Invitae marker panel to us, you know, because we can't really see it, and so they'll say, okay, well, I have a VUS in collagen 6 or something, some gene. Do you think that's causing my EDS? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, so there needs to be people doing biology. There's so many people doing genetics, and then they stop at the genetics because they don't have a robust research lab. It's easy to farm out and get a whole exome panel done. It's easy to do that, and it's quick. It doesn't really cost that much money. what comes after that is really hard. And that's what's needed. We need more of those people who can do biology and understand what are these VUSs, variants of unknown significance. What do they mean anything? Do you have to have multiple ones of them together? So we need more of that. That's what my lab and the students in there do, is they try to take these genetic discoveries and validate them in different ways.